Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am super duper excited about Floriferous. It's the next game coming to Kickstarter for Proliferous Games, and one of the things that folks were requesting was more insight into sort of the publishing game creation process at Proliferous Games. And while I've sort of talked about some of the design process and Kickstarter process and interviewed different folks over the years, perhaps I don't talk enough about how it all comes together, and I think people are curious about that. So if you are, this is a great video to listen to, and I'll try to throw in some pieces of art and things like that from the game. By the way, the game is heading to Kickstarter. It's going to be the spring, but we have the preview page ready, so I'll link it below. You're interested, curious, you want to learn more, just click it, sign up. That would be awesome. You can also go to the Proliferous Games community page, which I'll link as well, for just ongoing updates and information. Now, I think actually Floriferous is a really interesting project. One of the things that I always think about from Proliferous Games is that, there's no set way we approach or think about a project. Usually it's working with a particular person, inspired by art. I mean, each game's really unique. One of the things that's been true, though, for the line of Herbaceous, Sunset Over Water, the games that I've done with Stephen and Beth Sobel, is that all of those titles started with art. I've told the story many times, but with Herbaceous, Beth was actually created a Bonanza reskin with herbs, and she was just posting it online, and I felt in absolute love with the art, and spoke to her about like, hey, can we make a game with that? That's not a reskin, but an original title. And then ultimately, after we had that, I linked up with Steve Finn, and he came up with a fantastic game, and that was sort of the start of a lot of projects. And Sunset Over Water started with Best Landscape Art. Herbaceous Sprouts was Herbaceous Sprouts, but again with the Whatnot cabinet, which is going to backers shortly and will be at retail soon. All of that really was inspired by and driven by that art and us collaborating together. After the Whatnot cabinet, though, we've been working on a lot of titles as a group. People have been busy. Beth has been working on just so many amazing titles. I mean, her work is incredible, and she's absolutely premium board game artist extraordinaire. And I don't know if we were taking a break, but things were busy, and so we didn't just jump into another title at the time, like another team title. And one of the things that happened that was interesting, and this is just sort of it's a little bit of non sequitur, but it comes up, is somebody I've been familiar with who has and runs like an amazing, massive, fantastic IP. Or they own some incredible intellectual property. Reached out to Steve and I about making a cooperative game for them. In particular, they had played Herbaceous Sprouts, and they were like, "We think we have this thing over here that would go really well with Herbaceous, a little bit different." And so, actually, Steve and I went down that path for a while, and we were working on and iterating. He was doing a lot of the design, but we were going back and forth trying to incorporate the IP. And I don't know the exact time frame, but it was probably 6 months or 9 months, a pretty decent amount of period where that was sort of what we were thinking about and working on. And ultimately, that title didn't work out in incorporating the IP. It sort of lost its simplicity, and it didn't really land. And, wasn't a big deal. It was, we were looking to see if we could make something with the brand, and we didn't, and maybe we'll get back to that brand another time. But afterwards, things were relatively quiet. Steve was doing Dr. Finn game stuff, and I was working on, been working on MLP, but maybe the 100 Tory or whatever at the time. And we weren't really working on anything. And then, and again, it's just really interesting. I'm trying to give the steps of this. I'll do a different one that's like really specific to the Floriferous design. But so, along the same time, I have Legendary Creatures. And Legendary Creatures is this fantastic game designed by Christopher Ham. But it's like thick and heavy. It's a midweight game, almost a heavyweight game. And, I always wanted to make a lighter weight version. And if you're familiar with this game, it has these incredible animal meeples. And I think there's an awesome opportunity to make like a meeple menagerie game, like a game with like all the meeples in the world, all these different creatures, and you're collecting them or moving them or whatever, but tons of, you open the box and it's just like meeples. And that was a very exciting idea to me. And I was working on thinking about it. And I don't know if sometimes Steve has a gap in his schedule. I don't remember what happened, but he was like, hey, is there anything you want to do? And I was like, well, would you be interested in this legendary creatures thing? The game, I sent him the rules for the game. He's like, yeah, this is like a really complex game. I'm like, no, I want to do something lightweight, very much in that other space, but using these fantastic creatures. And so, he started working on it. And I don't know, this overlapped into COVID, into stay at home and all those things. And at some point, Steve was like, okay, hey, I got something. And he brought it up on probably Tabletopia. And we started playing it, and like we worked together, he would show me, I'd be like, well, that doesn't work as well, and he tried this, and so it was this lengthy tower, and you were working up, and at each step of the way, you could have different creatures, and they joined your team, and you were collecting them. In some ways, like, actually, he nailed it with Nanga Parbat, which is an amazing two-player game, if you're not familiar, from Steve Finn, and it's like, that game's spectacular. The game we were playing together wasn't spectacular. But it was working through and had all these interesting mechanics. And so he'd do a version, and we'd chat about it. He'd do another version, and we'd chat about it. And, it was interesting because it was starting to struggle in the way that brand, an IP one we were working on, where it like felt like it had all of these complexities, but it was missing sort of the spark and the delight that, Steve is so good at. And to some extent, I think, there's a certain, he's the king of fillers for a reason. But also, it just wasn't clicking, right? We're playing. And it was sort of like, okay, well, what if, so there was this amazing, super fun mechanic, which was you're collecting things, and as you collect them, you also have opportunities to collect ways to score them, right? So you're collecting, in that game, it was like hats and animals and spell books or whatever. But you might also want a thing that's like you get extra points for all the books you have, and you can decide I want to get an object or I want to get the thing that scores the object. And this isn't unheard of. There are lots of games that have this type of mechanic, but some way in how we were moving across the board and making the decision between the two, it was like that is awesome. It really felt good. But then there was all these other rules and complications, and what are we going to do about the scoring? And I don't remember exactly how we landed on it, but it was something like, Steve, why don't we get rid of all of this? Like, I know you've been working on this for the last 3, 4, 5 months. I know we've been through thousands of iterations, but like, the game without all this stuff is great. Like, what about just doing the game? And I think he might have been like, well, if we just did it like that, it would be more like, it'd be like more like an herbaceous. Like, it'd be much more of a simple title. And I was like, all right. He's like, but is that going to work with what you want for legendary creatures? And this is really important. The answer is no, it won't. But whatever. Oh, it's like, don't worry about that. Like, I want to chase the game, not chase the game idea. I'm coming back to the magical meeple madness game. I will. I'm going to get there. If you have any ideas, find me. But I was like, forget it. Just forget it. Let's follow the fun. Like, let's take this idea and do it. And so we start working on it, and we like strip everything out. And it's like, well, what is it? Fiction? It's like, well, I mean, it's sort of, you could be moving through a garden, and these could be flowers. I was like, all right, let's go for it. And, started playtesting and honing in on what is now Floriferous. And so that was really a very different process, right? It wasn't starting with a piece of art like we had on many times. And that's sort of unique to how we've worked together. He's made lots of games with us. He's generally a mechanics guy, like theme on top of mechanics. So it wasn't art first, but it was really, we had sort of gone through this process of sort of chasing some of these slightly more complex designs, and really the magic of what he's good at is that simplicity and that charm and that elegance. And I love that in games. I love it. And so, I just was like, forget that. Let's do this. But we didn't have, we had the idea of flowers, but we didn't have art. And so, it's got a garden. We're working through the stuff. And, Steve's prototype art, it's just like icons of flowers and bugs and stuff, like really simple. And, put a couple up. But then it was like, okay, well, let's go for the art. And, it was like, well, there's herbaceous, it's flowers, we've done this, let's go talk to Beth. And at the time, Beth is busy. Beth has got, we sort of came out of the blue. Like, we hadn't sort of gone through that art first, it was just sort of like, hey, Beth, we got a project you want to, and she was like, I can't. And then this was interesting. So I was like, okay, well, let's get some fantastic flower art. And I think what was interesting here, the next bump was, I didn't want game art. I wasn't, I feel like, Beth's work is amazing, but it's also, it's approachable, it's warm, it's these wonderful illustrations, right? And when art feels too gamified, stroked or cartoony or what, there's all different ways you want to sort of, but like, I wasn't looking for that. And so I was looking through a lot of portfolios, and if you a lot of people go to ArtStation, you look for flowers, you see some video game flowers, you see some 3D flowers, you don't see that much flower art. And I was struggling a little bit. Ultimately, there were a few artists who Beth had recommended a few, and I sort of scoured recommendations and looked at other games that had come out who I reached out to, some of which were available, some of which weren't. But I started that process of reach out. And I also started the process of like, I don't remember where it was, but just like being in stores and looking at patterns and whatever, Hallmark cards, and just looking for flowers, because flowers are everywhere. They're everywhere, and there's amazing flower art everywhere that's not just on ArtStation, right? And so that was really interesting. But at some point during this process, for a totally unrelated reason, I was talking with Jamie Stegmeyer from Stonemaier Games, who I talk about with it on occasion. We've had a lot of overlap on Kickstarter and that kind of thing. And, I was, I don't know if lamenting is the right word, but I was sort of saying, oh man, this would have been perfect, but, Beth wasn't available, and we're looking, and basically, hey, anyone come to mind? Can you think of anyone? And, I don't remember if it was the same call or he called me back. Maybe it was the same call, but at first he didn't. But then he was like, well, actually, yes, there is this artist. She's a watercolor painter. She's not a board game artist at all. We've been talking to her about a project, but it's not there yet. But it's been great talking with her. And so, I can introduce you, and here, let me send you a link to her work. And so, like, her name, she's French. And so it's Clementine Campardieu, but I even think that's not how you pronounce Clementine in French. I don't know. I can't do a good French pronunciation of her name, but Clementine, and I'll link and you can see it. She has this just gorgeous, fantastic watercolor art. And actually it's edgy and interesting and different. Like, it's not actually the Hallmark watercolor, not what you'd expect. It's like modern, compelling watercolor work. And like, her stuff is amazing. You got to check it out. Just go check her out. Her link. And, at first, and then looking through, I saw a piece over here, but, a little bit I was concerned, that it wasn't going to hit that sort of the natural feel. Like, and how could, a lot of the process here is around art and flowers being identifiable, and when you get some of her more abstract watercolor work, it's flowers, but like, you might not know which flower it is clearly and consistently every time, right? So anyway, got introduced to her, she's fantastic, and started going back and forth. But so then now we have this other interesting piece, which is, we dealt with this on the Whatnot cabinet a little bit, which was, okay, ultimately what we needed was five flower types, in 5 colors, and then we needed 5 bugs. And for the flower types, there are a lot of flowers. There's so many flowers. I'm like researching flowers, right? But it's like, okay, what do we need? We need, and it was like, no roses. We're not going to do roses. We need 5 very identifiable flowers, all of which are garden flowers, because we just wanted that garden feel. Didn't want it to be exotic. So like flowers you would see in your garden that are distinct enough that they look very different from each other and can clearly be drawn naturally in different colors, because I'm going to have 5 tulips or 5 daisies or 5 mums or lilies, right? But are in such a way that they like are even though these are going to be watercolors, so they're not photographs, to make them look and feel different. And we went through lists and lists and lists and flowers and talked to gardeners and other folks and friends and like went back and forth. And Kim Robinson, who does our graphic design, has been doing a fantastic job on Floriferous, has been involved and was sort of like, okay, well, how about these? And Clementine was like, how about these? And so we, we just going through this process. And then, and this is where Clementine was awesome, was like, hey, can we start messing around and trying to figure this out? And went through a lot. And this is watercolor. This is what's amazing. This is all hand painted. So it's like not that easy to like go touch it up, right? It's not that easy to change the shape and erase. It's like we have some video of her working. I'll post some of the video of her working, and you can't, the water dries at a certain rate, and then it's down, and then you're putting on top. You can't just edit. You can't erase. And so there's a lot of thought around figuring it out and getting the colors and the split, right? And so that was just this incredible, iterative, thoughtful process on how do we split it. And one of the most amazing things, we go through this process, we were like identifying, we bring it down. And then at the time, and still, my wife is playing a ton of Animal Crossing. And it's like, they have lots of flowers and flower icons. What flowers do they use? And they have 7 flower types or 8 flower types, whatever it is. But actually, we overlap with the 5 or 4 of the 5 or whatever. I think they have, instead of a lily, a windflower or something. But pretty close. It's like, oh yeah, we found the 5 shapes that you can find that really are done this way. So there was that process over there. Steve refining the design. Also working on, again, what are the 5 bugs? Because we need to have these bugs on the card, and okay, bees, great. Butterflies, great. Done. Ladybugs, okay, great. But then you're like, ants. Well, ants are small. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? And figuring out the different bugs to use and incorporate into the cards into the flower cards was its own process. Also, then Steve will have hey, I have this card that works this way, and it's a rainbow flower. And hey, I have this card that works this way, and it's a chair. And you're like, well, it's not going to be that, right? And so actually I reached out to Keith Mateka, who's doing the solo design, but this was earlier in the process, trying to talk about hey, you're in this garden, we need this another object that you collect, but it can't be a rainbow colored flower. Oh, what if it was objects or stones or little sculptures? And then we started doing these sculptures in the garden, which are fantastic. And the chairs were these representation of whatever, but we needed to make these arrangements which represent groupings of flowers and colors, and then working out the details for coming to make those arrangement cards was this really delicate, interesting problem, and she knocked it out of the park. The artwork is fantastic, and it's all painted. It's crazy. Couple other interesting things are then, so Kim's getting more involved and thinking about, hey, how do we, look, we need to make sure not everyone recognizes every plant every time, right? Flowers is not everyone's bag. what are the icons working? We went like sheet after sheet after sheet. I'll put of icon comparison A, B, C, looks this way, looks that way. Like, do you do the beetle with the darker outside and the lighter inside, or the lighter inside and the light? And so working through that iconography and the color sets, and then even so, like, we wanted, the color wasn't enough on the little button, which I'll show, but looking at, okay, well, the orange and the purple are closer, or not, like say pink and orange are a little close. Like the white's really far away, but these two are like sort of closer colors, and you can do a lot of these tests where you see mappings of different people at different color challenges. I like to call them color challenges because I'm color challenged in certain regards. But anyway, and that's not the technical term. And then and then we're like, well, actually, orange and pink, one is a hexagon and one is an octagon, or pentagon and an octagon. Those shapes are actually a little close. Let's make this one a square, this one a circle, and then use some of those other shapes for the ones that are further apart, and really just trying to boil that down. Other little things, normally when you display cards in your hand, you put the label across the top, or Bacius has the label across the top. But one, you're never holding these cards in your hand. They're always on the table. But, plants grow upwards, and it just was like, man, if we have this UI at the top, it's like always at the top of, it's always like we're covering up a part of the blossoming flower, right? And so we're like moved it to the top and the bottom. And again, I think if it's in your hand, it's got to be up there. But since it's laid out in front of you, the bottom worked, I think. And so again, working on the icons for the different flowers, working on the icons for the bugs and making it clear. We have figuring out the desire cards. At the top, you have the bounty cards, and originally they were all just Steve Finn special cards that were icons, and then we were looking at how can we give this cap, and we were thinking about making a trellis top or some shape, and then but we want to keep we want it to fit in this little box. It was getting complicated, but it was like, well, can we get it so that they all sort of fit together? And we had examples of other art where you can string a background across 3 cards, and you can line them up and sort of push them together. You don't really need to do this, but it's a nice effect. It looks cool. And I was mentioning to Clementine, and she was like, I don't know, And I was like, no, it's like tiling in a video game. Here, look, here's an example, and what you have to do is you draw these lines across, and then this is your end, and you just need to end your art this way. But she's working with watercolor, but she did it. She set it up herself and figured it out and spent a lot of time, but figured out how to have this watercolor image that you can line up, and it's not perfect, but it works. And then we had pawns, so we wanted to grab some of the pawn work that we did from the Whatnot cabinet, and making the flower tokens and bringing them to life, which I think Kim did a fantastic job with. So really this awesome mixture of collaboration and challenges and problem solving to bring together this marriage, right? And I think of art, theme, and design, right? And then the physicality of the product. Keith working on taking those steps, working on the single player, pulling together and making the rule book clear, trying to figure out a nice way to deal with you set up a different amount of cards for the different player accounts, given how it works, so getting that in order. And just a really interesting process, and now it's getting ready for the Kickstarter and all that. But I think it's, for those who are making games, you make your first game, you make your second game, but then I find it's about really finding opportunities, not being afraid to take on challenges and do the hard things, right? Not again, being willing to say, yeah, this design isn't working, let's give up on this project, but there's this piece of it, there's this nugget of delight that is fantastic, let's run with that. oh, and let's run with it. And then suddenly, oh, it's feeling this way. This could work this way. Oh, the artist that we've used so far isn't available. What are we going to do? Well, we don't want to compromise and not have it feel rich and wonderful and just fantastic. Oh, we're going to work with somebody who hasn't done this type of work before and just does fine art. Okay, well, let's gotta not teach, but show and give examples and talk through the process to meet these art design requirements with this art and make the art feel natural and not stilted, right? Feel alive. And I think that's fantastic. Even coming around, the garden, walking through the garden, talking about the cover, and as we did the process and as the game just came together more and more, I was like, what are we going to call it? I think we're going to call it Floriferous. And then we're thinking about the box, and we're doing, and it's like, you know what? No, this is really lining up and tying up with, it holds together in the family with herbaceous, and let's bring that out. Let's cultivate that feel and look and bring it to life. And so, that is the process, condensed from whatever 6-8 months or whatever it was, a year, something like that, and just excited. It's a delightful game. I mean, the most disappointing thing for me, easily, is I don't get to play with my mom. I don't get to teach it to her and then give her the opportunity to teach it to everyone else, because she just loved it, and I will get to, right? I haven't been able to see her in whatever, a year. It's crazy. But she's in New York, I'm in California, right? We're not getting on a plane to. Anyway, so hopefully this was interesting, right? This is sort of this vantage point. We'll have a design diary type of stuff, and we'll just look at the art too. But this is around, like, each Pencilverse Games project is a little bit differently. The approach is different. Like, how you give it the spark. My wife's a baker. Professionally for a while. She hasn't been doing it professionally, but she's been baking. And we were watching a master class on bread making by this French baker. And she was talking about kneading the dough and the process of kneading the dough, and that, like, what actually you're doing is you're, like, pushing energy into it and, like, pushing love into the dough, and that, like, makes better bread. And I think when you have something exciting and compelling that you're really trying and pushing and making and massaging and working, as long as you don't, you can smother it and kill the life from it. But if you're pushing all that joy into it, it creates joy out, right? And bread, it's a great tasting bread, but in a game, it's a game that people find delightful and exciting and fun. So hopefully it worked. And when it comes out of the oven, after we can do the Kickstarter and get the rest of the way on it, it plays deliciously. It's relaxing and enjoyable. You love it. So anyway, thanks for watching. Bye. Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks. Bye.